So there's a thread on hammock forums discussing using a climbing rated carabiner in a marlin spike hitch as compared to using a toggle. And the idea is that there's some very unique things going on when you use a climbing rated carabiner in a marlin spike hitch, and that there's actually two very distinct ways to tie a marlin spike hitch that drastically change the way that the hitch itself performs when using a climbing rated carabiner. So let's take a look. There's actually two totally separate ways to tie this. We've got our working end here. Now we make our loop and we bring through our working end, and that results in one way to tie this hitch. Now once again, when you use this in what I would call a traditional hammock suspension with a whoopee sling, would be you obviously would snug this hitch up next to your toggle here. You'd place your whoopee sling over top on the behind the toggle here on the actual hitch portion, and everything obviously functions fine. That's one way to tie this marlin spike hitch that once again works perfectly when you're using it in the traditional manner with a toggle. Let's take a look at our second method for tying this, and that would be to make our loop. And instead of pulling through the working end, we're going to pull through our non-working end. Now once again, you get the exact same results when using a toggle. You snug this up to the toggle here. You would place your whoopee sling behind it on the hitch portion and everything would be fine. Now the interesting thing is that some unique things start happening once you start loading this loop here. So imagine instead of having a toggle in this place, you've now slipped a climbing rated carabiner in here, and now you're going to clip your whoopee sling in to that climbing rated carabiner. Some very unique things start happening. And once again, maybe this is just me being dense, but I never really realized that there was two unique ways to tie this hitch. And once again, it drastically affects the way it performs when used with a climbing rated carabiner. So let's take a look at this example where we've grabbed the non-working end through the loop here. What happens is, when we actually snug this up, when you start applying a load to this, so you've clipped your climbing rated carabiner into this, once you start applying load, it actually further cinches onto the carabiner. Okay, so once again, take a look at how that would end up playing out. So say here's the loop here that's been created in the marlin spike hitches here. Once you start applying load to it, it actually further cinches down on the carabiner. Now that would be the preferred method to use when using a carabiner in this configuration. Now once again, maybe that's just me being dense, but I never really realized that that would work the best in this configuration, because if you take a look at the other way to tie this, here's our working end. If we take our loop here and we grab our working end through it, something very different happens once you start to apply a load to it. So now say we've clipped our climbing rated carabiner into this. When you start to apply a load, it actually has the exact opposite effect, where now we're actually pulling the working end through the hitch itself until you have the possibility of that, the loop there failing, and you obviously, crashing out of your hammock in theory. So once again, two very unique ways to tie a marlin spike hitch. And once again, maybe this is just information that that I haven't fully absorbed. But once again, I've tied this hitch hundreds of times when I was using whoopee slings for my hammock suspension, and never really realized the slight nuance, because once again, when you're using it in the traditional format, it doesn't really matter if you grab the working end or the non-working end. But however, once you start to think about a climbing rated carabiner in here and clipping into that, some very unique things start happening. And something to consider if you plan on using it that way. Once again, the correct way would be to make your loop and grab the non-working end, because that ends up, once you apply load, it further cinches that hitch down, as compared to your other configuration, which would be grabbing your working end through that loop. And once again, once you clip that climbing rated carabiner in there and you start to apply load, it ends up pulling, in theory, could pull that tail out, causing a failure. So once again, just some things to consider. And once again, maybe that's just me not picking this up over, a handful of years of messing around with this stuff, but something to consider if you're planning on using a climbing rated carabiner and actually clipping into it to use for your hammock suspension.